Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece Straw Hat Family by Hotspot the 626th. As the crew travels through the Grand Line, something happens that not even the crew could prepare for. A baby? What are the Straw Hats going to do? Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios!
It's finally time. Welcome to the crew, Monkey D. As Nami and Luffy kissed, the woman's eyes were wide open. Only seconds ago did her water just break in the moment with her love cease. She was suddenly overcome in pain and her legs weakened incredibly. Because of this, Nami almost fell on Luffy, who quickly noticed Nami's action. As he held up, he looked on his fiancée worriedly. "Nami, what's wrong?" From a distance, the crew saw what was ongoing. When they saw the two lovers' actions, many of them were confused. Zoro was the first to speak on it. "Wow, I know it's a big deal and all, but the woman should control her emotions more. Don't speak ill of Nami, Marimo. This is a tender moment for her." Sanji immediately retorted against Zoro. The green-haired swordsman growled back, with Sanji doing the same. Luckily, before they could start an argument, Frankie spoke up in concern. "I don't know, bro. Straw Hat looks a bit worried." "Could something have happened?" asked Brook, looking curiously at the scene. Back to the couple, Luffy was still waiting for an answer from Nami. The woman had suddenly begun breathing in repetition slowly. Luffy was really confused as to why. Did they kiss for too long? Nami released a small grunt that surprised Luffy. She then looked up, sweating lightly, and spoke. "Luffy, I think it's time." Luffy didn't understand. Time? Is it dinner time? It literally took every ounce of willpower for her to not shout or hit Luffy in anger. Instead, she restated, "No, Luffy, I mean, the baby, it wants to come out." "Oh, the baby's coming." Luffy smiled and nodded. For a few moments Luffy did nothing but smile and hold on to Nami. Though Nami was sure Luffy didn't fully understand, and it was getting harder and harder by the minute, she waited for the information to settle into Luffy's head. Finally, Luffy gasped, "Ah, the baby's coming." "Yes, Luffy, it is." "What are they screaming about?" asked Usopp, staring at the couple. The crew continued to watch on. They were confused when they saw Luffy begin to panic, running around Nami, who seemed to be just barely standing. Eventually, Luffy stopped and picked up Nami bridal style, surprising them. As Luffy and Nami neared the crew, they could see that Luffy was in full panic and Nami seemed to be breathing in repetition, a little faster than before. Chopper shouted out, "Luffy, what's wrong?" "The baby's coming," shouted Luffy, sounding panicky. Unlike him, the whole crew gasped in quick realization. "What? It is?" Usopp shouted in shock. "We need to take her to a doctor quickly," said Chopper, still in heavy point. "Chopper, you're the doctor. We need to take Nami back to the Sunny quickly," quickly corrected Chopper. Robin was already on top of the situation. She then looked out to the setting sun. She then spoke grimly, "I'm afraid the real beast may come out at night." Frankie then called out, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's move." The moment Luffy reached the crew, they all began running once again, this time heading for Sunny. "Just keep breathing, Nami." Robin was keeping up with Luffy as she provided support to the laboring woman. Though Nami was breathing, which had picked up a bit more, she flashed a soft smile at Robin before shifting back to a pained expression. "Damn it, Luffy, how dare you put Nami in so much pain?" Sanji grunted in displeasure. Luffy did not respond, being far too focused on keeping Nami safe and getting to the Sunny. "Yell at Luffy later, we need to get Nami to the ship," shouted Usopp, countering any potential argument. Soon the crew reached the lighted Sunny. Despite the urgency, Luffy knew better than to enter via his devil fruit powers for once and used the gangplank. As they stepped onto the grassy deck, Chopper shouted, "Take her to the infirmary, Luffy." Immediately upon hearing, Luffy obediently rushed up the stairs with Robin and Chopper. The rest of the crew, tired from running, stopped as they walked on deck. They all watched worriedly as the others entered the infirmary and slammed the door. It was out of their hands now. "Place her on the bed." Listening to Chopper, Luffy carefully placed Nami on the bed. Chopper and Robin grabbed all the things that Chopper would need to deliver the baby as well as for if any problems would arise. With no hospital for miles, and being on the Grand Line, they had to prepare for the strong possibility that Nami would deliver out at sea. Chopper then yelled out another order, "We're gonna need to remove her clothing." "I'll handle it." Robin then crossed her arms. A few of her arms appeared around Nami and, with care, removed all clothing that would obscure the procedure. Luffy blushed a bit and was about to take his leave. Before he could leave, Nami grabbed his hand. Luffy looked back in surprise, meeting Nami's eyes. He saw that Nami looked scared. "Luffy, please, help me." Luffy's eyes widened. This sounded familiar. Luffy could remember Nami having said something similar back when she was at a low due to Arlong's backstabbing. Her expression now mirrored that one, only filled with far more fear. Luffy turned back to Nami and with his other hand grabbed his straw hat. He placed it on Nami's head, much like he did back then, and crouched down next to her. Nami was in surprise and Luffy now held his hand with both of his and gave her a determined smile. "I'm right here." Nami smiled only for it to quickly change into an expression of pain. With it she squeezed Luffy's hand, but since Luffy was a rubber man the pain was far less extensive. Robin and Chopper had taken notice of the exchange and were touched by it, however, they had a duty to do as well. "Let's begin," Chopper stated with confidence. Robin nodded in agreement. It was now the dead of night and outside the infirmary the crew sat around waiting for any news whatsoever. Since the others had entered, no one left or entered the infirmary. Despite having been tired earlier, every last member found themselves fighting off sleep. They would endure for Nami's sake, but they were also worried. Nami's scream, even from within the infirmary, could be heard in their fullest. There were several attempts by Sanji to dash inside for her rescue, but he was suppressed quickly. This didn't help whenever Nami's scream were accompanied with shouts that varied. "Damn it, Luffy. When this is over, I'm gonna have you fixed. This is all your fault. Moneki D. Luffy. Get this stubborn man's stubborn brat out of me. Damn it, it hurts. I'm raising your debt, Zoro." With Nami's most recent shout, Zoro shouted indignantly, "What? It's not even my fault." "Ignore her, swordsman. It's just pain talk," Frankie stated as he remained next to Brook as they held Sanji back. The poor chef was at his wit's end due to his moral motto for women. "Nami, I'll rescue you." Mrs. Nami's cries in pain combined with Mr. Sanji's "to help" are making my ears ring. "Ah. But I have no ears because I'm only bones." "Yo-ho-ho, skull joke," spoke Brook lightheartedly. Zoro, despite how lame the joke was, nodded in agreement. "I agree. Let's just knock Love Cook out." Zoro then went to grab one of his swords. Then Usopp blew a whistle. "No, we all agreed we endure this for Nami and Luffy." "Speaking of which, how are those animals enduring?" asked Frankie as he looked out to the dark forest. "I'll check." Usopp walked over to the side and looked onto shore. He couldn't see well, but he could make out large and dangerous creatures trying to approach the Sunny. Surprisingly, Usopp didn't look worried in the slightest. "I'm going to kill you, Luffy." With another scream from Nami, the shadowy beasts froze in their tracks. They then immediately walked back into the forests. Usopp gave a chuckle. It seems that the top beast here on Vicious Wild is still Nami. "With those threats, I wouldn't be surprised," Zoro said with a smirk. "We're never having a kid again. I'll rip them off before that happens." Every man, even Brook, visible, shivered after that last scream. They all then spoke the say. It would be a few more hours of constant screams and shouts before evidence that the sun would begin rising over the horizon. The crew waiting outside had remained awake through the whole night, an ordeal that they would be greatly commended on. At some point, Nami had just gone straight into screaming, which they hoped was maybe a good sign. Only for it to last until the sun began to rise. With the first peaks of sun shining on the blue, the screaming changed completely. "Wah!" The crew outside immediately stood up. Their tiredness forgotten, this new cry was far from what they usually heard, and for many it may have been either a long time or never since they last heard it. It was a baby's cry. All stood waiting for quite some time until finally the door opened. The crew watched as Luffy, looking almost far worse than they did, stumbled out with dazed expression. The man stopped just at the railing to the upper deck where they all could see him. None of them said anything as they waited for Luffy to do or say something. Unfortunately, what he did do was he fell over the railing and crashed on the deck below. "Luffy!" shouted Usopp as the Heian group of men rushed to their captain's side. "Oi, Straw Hat, you okay?" questioned Frankie, raising his sunglasses, checking on the captain. Looking down on Luffy, it looked like the fall literally had zero effect on him as he continued to look in a daze straight into the sky. Seeing this, Zoro shouted, "Back off, give him some space." "Hey Luffy, is it a girl or boy?" Sanji asked out of nowhere, though heeding Zoro's advice. "Mr. Luffy, are you okay?" asked Brook in concern. Finally, Luffy sat up from his spot. The group waited for the man to reply. The crew could barely hear Luffy and inched a bit closer to listen. Luffy continued to mumble, I'm a dad." Surprised by Luffy's answer, the group let out a laugh. Apparently, even Luffy could be knocked senseless by reality when it involves his kid. While most of the group continued to laugh, Zoro offered the dazed captain a helping hand up. Luffy took it, and as he stood back up, Zoro spoke. "Looks like it's official then, congratulations, Captain." Brook then cheered, "Yo-ho-ho-ho, 3 cheers for Mr. Luffy and Mrs. Nami on their new child." "Kanpai." The group cheered loudly so both Luffy and Nami could hear. Luffy soon broke out of his daze and smiled with a blush, looking embarrassed. As they cheered, Usopp soon noticed something. "Kanpai Luffy, what happened to your hand?" Luffy now looked confused and looked at his hands. While one was perfectly normal, the other was literally the color purple. The crew stopped cheering and looked on the hand in shock. Luffy just laughed. "I was just helping Nami. Is that why your hat is gone too?" Sanji soon pointed that Luffy was not wearing his trademark hat. Luffy just smiled and nodded. The chef found that answer satisfying as he lit another cigarette. "When can we see the baby, Straw Hat?" asked Frankie, giving Luffy a slap on the back, a very hard one at that. Luffy smiled. "When Chopper is done cleaning up, and Nami's rested a bit." "Well, is it a boy or a girl then?" Usopp asked hurriedly. Before Luffy could say, the door to the infirmary opened again. Everyone looked back up to see Robin smiling down on them with an amused expression. "Having fun with the boys, Captain?" Robin Schwan. Sanji immediately began twirling around upon sight of the beautiful archaeologist. "Is Nami okay?" Luffy stood back up, feeling a bit worried about his fiancée. Robin chuckled and shook her head. "Yes, she's fine, Luffy." Luffy sighed in relief. Robin then continued to say, "Chopper says it will be alright for everyone to come in as long as everyone is quiet." The group nodded and began shuffling up the stairs to the infirmary. Robin then led inside with Luffy taking the lead. Once everyone was in, they were met with the most unusual and unlikely scene they would probably ever see. In the infirmary bed was Nami, who looked like she had the roughest sleep in years, staring down at a bundle of cloth in her hands with a loving smile. Chopper was nearby, jotting down some things down in a notebook. When Robin shut the door, both Nami and Chopper looked towards the group. Chopper spoke quietly, "Hey everyone." The group smiled while Luffy rushed over to Nami's side. Nami seemed to smile even brighter than before and extended her arm to the captain. "Luffy." Nami pulled Luffy closer to her and the baby. Luffy looked down on the cloth to see the face of a resting babe with hair that looked black, maybe dark brown. The sleeping baby was so peaceful Luffy couldn't help but smile. "Hey there," Luffy said to the baby. He then looked at Nami. "Is it okay if I hold?" Nami smiled. "Always." Nami then brought Luffy's hand under the baby's wrapped form. Luffy then brought his other hand around and carefully brought the baby to his face. "Chopper, is the baby a boy or girl?" Usopp had walked over to Chopper at his desk and asked the reindeer his question. Before Chopper could answer, Luffy and Nami did. "She's a beautiful baby girl." The whole crew smiled, some more than others. "Ha! Told you the baby would be a girl," Sanji said with a victorious grin to Zoro. The green-haired swordsman clenched his teeth as he dug into his pocket. He then tossed a few belly coins to Sanji, who caught them easily. Usopp was surprised when he heard the couple spoke. "Whoa, a girl, that's—" Usopp stopped when he noticed that both Luffy and Nami were glaring at him dangerously. Usopp then amended his sentence. "Gee, great, she'll be as pretty as her mother." Unless she takes after her father, stated Frankie as he removed his sunglasses as to get a better look at the baby. He was then met with a swift kick. Don't you dare insult her like that, Sanji said in disapproval. Nami smiled as she looked down on the baby girl. That would be wonderful. The crew looked at Nami surprised, though in retrospect it wouldn't be that bad if she took a little bit from Luffy. Luffy simply chuckled as he cradled the baby. I just hope she likes adventures. Ah, excuse me, but does the young babe have a name? Everyone turned to Brook as the skeleton brought up a point. They all looked back to the couple wondering the same. Luffy and Nami were surprised. They both looked at each confused. We never really talked about it, Nami said in earnest. Well, we can't have that, Robin said with a smile. How about Super Franny? Shouted Frankie while doing his pose. Sanji interjected in a cool manner, that's just a female version of your name. Ooh, Sakura. Sakura, that's a pretty name, Chopper said as he jumped up and down excited. Again Sanji interjected, she's way too adorable for just a pretty name. Plus Sakura can be a boy's name too. Chopper was shocked by the rejection. How about Panty? Said Brook joking. Or at least they thought he was. He was met with a swift kick from Sanji. Usopp then spoke up with a proud idea. Well, I think that if the name has anything to do with you, I'll kick that nose inward until you have no nose. With Sanji's threat, Usopp closed his mouth and began sweating bullets. Zoro then added to the list, how about Luffiko as a name, since we can't name her Luffy Jr. Both Luffy and Nami stared at Zoro with expressions of disbelief. Sanji, again, interjected on their behalf. What kind of name is Luffiko? Sounds like someone was too lazy to come up with a real name? Shut up, I don't hear any better ones from you. Of course I have a better one, Sanji said coolly. Nami and Luffy looked on the chef with interest. However, that interest was completely betrayed as Sanji spoke in a suave tone. Nami Jr. That's even lazier, all the males shouted at Sanji in rage. Nami sighed. While some of the names were good, strike that, only Chopper's was. She really didn't feel for any of them. She then looked over to Robin, who was her last hope for a name, Robin Nay. Seeing how she was addressed, the young woman chuckled beforely agreed to the name Captain picked. Nami as well as the crew was surprised and looked over to Luffy. What name did you pick, Luffy? Asked Nami in interest. Luffy, overcome with a bout of bashfulness, scratched the back of his head and looked away from the Nami and the crew with a faint blush. Well, for a girl, I was thinking that she would be as pretty as Nami, so, I liked, Namika. The crew was surprised by Luffy's suggestion. They all thought over the name. Chopper spoke out softly, child of Nami. It's got, Mikan, in the name kinda, said Usopp recalling Nami's favorite fruit and most precious treasure. The name itself means, wave, just like Nami's does, Robin said with a smile. Mika, Frankie and Brook stated joyfully. And that nickname means, beautiful scent, Sanji stated with a chuckle. Zoro then finished the list, Monkey D. Namika. Nami thought over each thing the group had said about this name. Despite the name being similar to her own name, looking down at her daughter she couldn't help but feel that it fitted her perfectly. Nami smiled as she looked up at Luffy, who had been waiting for her answer. It's perfect, Luffy. Monkey D. Namika, that will be her name, I love it. Luffy grinned happily. He then raised the baby up, holding her with great care, as he shouted, welcome to the crew, Monkey D. Namika. Shush. The whole crew shushed Luffy as he was a little too loud. Luffy quickly closed his mouth, but it was too late. The baby began to stir a bit in her bundle of cloth. The whole crew stepped back waiting for the eventual loud wail that came when one upsets a sleeping baby. But one never came. Instead, the little baby girl began to open her eyes for what may have been the first time. Luffy noticed this and brought the baby up closer to his face. The baby's eyes then opened. Black eyes stared back at dark brown ones as daughter saw her father for the first time. Luffy was completely mesmerized by the baby in his hand. His daughter, ignoring the many around that were awing in wonder. After some time of just taking in the sight, Luffy smiled at his daughter. With care, Luffy joined Nami on the bed as he held the child securely as to see both him and Nami. Hi, Mika, I'm your daddy and this. Luffy nudged at Nami, who was wondering what her husband-to-be was doing. is your beautiful mommy." Nami blushed, but smiled hearing Luffy's compliment. Luffy then turned the baby towards the crew. "And this is our crew." The crew smiled and waved to the baby, trying to look as harmless and loving as any family would. The baby just stared the group and then she was turned back to Luffy and Nami. Nami then took over speaking to Mika. With a smile, she told the young babe, "They're all a bit weird, but you'll grow to love them like a family." "A super family," added Frankie with vigor. "A Straw Hat family, to be exact," Robin said with a smile, continuing Frankie's addition to the term. Nami smiled and nodded. "Yeah, a Straw Hat family. They may not be related, but they will always be there for you because they're our nakama." Once Nami finished, the most amazing thing happened. Baby Mika, who was born only an hour or so ago, smiled at her parents. Despite having no teeth, yet, the baby looked at her parents with a smile that, to them, shamed Luffy's own. Both parents gasped in surprise, catching the crew's attention, but then Nami took the baby and hugged her. "Oh my Oda, you're so precious." "What happened, Nami?" asked Usopp. Luffy answered. Mika just smiled. Chopper gasped in surprise. "Really? But babies usually don't smile until they reach 2 months in age." Figures that the first thing she does is smile. "I think she did take after Luffy." Zoro chuckled as he leaned against the wall. He then looked over to Sanji, wondering if he would throw a fit. Surprisingly, he didn't. "How sweet. Mika-kwan is already surpassing other babies." Brook then added, "As joyful as the chef, she is a genius." The two perverts of the crew were dancing as they celebrated the baby's first accomplishment. They were joined by Usopp, Chopper, and Frankie as they popped off streamers. The rest only laughed, Luffy just because he was happy that everyone else was happy, while the others were doing such because it was only a small milestone for baby Mika. The baby didn't seem all that scared by the sudden celebration. Instead, the baby looked like she was about to fall asleep. Robin quickly noticed and quickly spoke up. "It seems Mika is already tired." "Ah, already?" said the whole crew to Robin. Luffy looked at Nami and noticed that she too was looking tired as well. "Yeah, we should let Nami rest too," Luffy said in consideration for Nami. The crew understood and they all began leaving out the room. Even Chopper and Robin left to most likely rest after a long night. All that was left was the young couple and their newborn baby. Nami could feel her strength finally give out, and so she called to Luffy, "Luffy, can you take Mika and put her in her crib?" "Yeah," Luffy said, but when he went to grab the baby he stopped. Nami looked up at Luffy concerned. "Luffy, whoa. Look at her, Nami." Nami was taken back when Luffy suddenly became overexcited. He leaned into Nami as they both looked their child. Nami giggled softly at how childish he was acting, but she found it cute. "I can't believe that you made her. It's so weird." Nami chuckled. "She's ours, Luffy." Nami then turned her head and kissed Luffy. The captain was surprised by this sign of affection, but he happily kissed back. It was rather quick as Nami broke away, leaning back into her bed looking exhausted. Before she souped bed to sleep, she gave her husband-to-be and daughter one last look and spoke on last time, "Our precious Mika." As Nami fell asleep, Luffy smiled and took Mika out of Nami's arms. He walked slowly to the crib as he just wanted to look at his child, a weird thing for him to even say, and wonder about her simple amazingness. But all things had to come to an end, and Luffy very begrudgingly placed his sleeping daughter in her crib. He began to set things around his daughter, trying to either keep her warm or keep her safe for any reason. Once he had finished, he continued to stare at his sleeping daughter in wonder and amazement. He thought over many ideas, going on adventures, eating all kinds of meat, finding gold, wondering if she'll have Nami's greedy quirk, and so much more. Every last one of them made Luffy smile. He couldn't wait to share them with his child when she would be old enough to do the things he imagined. And though he thought of many happy things, there was one far back in his mind that made the man feel worried. Will I be a good dad to her? Nami and the newborn Mika spent the whole day and a half in the infirmary recovering. Like them, the crew also recovered from staying the whole night awake in anticipation of the baby. When the log post finally became fixed on the next island, the crew left Vicious Wild with a new member. The journey would take some days to reach the next island. All the while the crew kept visiting baby Mika whenever they had free time, which to Luffy was all the time. Nami found it sweet. Once they landed on their new island, The crew had decided to make a decision that they would make base on the island for some time. Or at least until they were either discovered or until they felt it time for them to move. 1 month after Mika was born, the crew was now facing something more fearsome than any enemy they had met to be. Sleep deprivation. While for the first few days since sailing and arriving, Mika had been an angel. Then came the crying. Worst, it came at night. Baby Mika, like any baby, began crying in the middle of the night. For whoever was on night duty, it was certainly surprising. For the first few days, the whole crew got up thinking one of them was in trouble. Eventually they got used to it, for the most part. Nami didn't wish to cause too much trouble for the rest of the crew, so she had crib in her room. Robin didn't mind. She instead took refuge in the library and came to bed sometime after Mika had finished her nightly tirade. And this night was no different. Hearing the cries of her baby, Nami was awakened. The young woman groggily sat up and looked over to side where a crib stood. "I'm coming, sweetie. I'm coming." Nami spoke tiredly as she swung her legs over the bed. Nami walked over to crib and picked up the crying baby. There, little princess, mommy has you." As Nami cradled the baby girl, Mika's cries softened slightly as she looked to see who had her. Nami smiled. "Are you hungry?" An obvious first question, but when your child has genetics from a bottomless pit, it was likely the obvious answer. Nami sat down and tried to feed Mika, but the baby seemed to refuse. "Not hungry? Then maybe you need a diaper change?" Nami checked over the baby, but Mika did not need a change. Mika just continued to cry. "Oh Mika, what is wrong?" Nami rocked the baby in her arms as she tried to get the baby back to sleep. It worked in at least calming her down, but the little baby still seemed displeased. Elsewhere on the ship, the entire crew was awake and tired. In the men's room, every last one of the men had bloodshot eyes. Usopp was the first to speak. "This is the 5th day." "Straw Hat, why is your daughter so loud?" Frankie moaned as he hanged over his bed looking at Luffy. Luffy hanged his head off his bunk looking dead. "I don't know." "She's your freaking daughter," shouted Zoro angry. "I can't sleep anywhere with her crying." "Shut up, Moss Head. These are the cries of an angel," Sanji countered, albeit tired. Zoro mumbled, "Born from a devil." Both Luffy and Sanji shouted, "Oi." Chopper was in his bunk awake as he tried to cover his ears with a pillow. He then muttered to himself, "Will she ever go asleep?" In the library, Robin heard the cries and ignored them to the best of her abilities. She too had bloodshot eyes, though of a lesser degree than the others. She continued to read, hoping that Nami could take care of the baby. Brook was on watch tonight, and though he didn't show, he too was quite tired. Now, back with Nami. "Maybe some fresh air will help." Nami sighed and walked outside her room with Mika in hand. She walked out onto the deck and looked around. It was the dead of night, but the night sky was clear and filled with the bright moon and stars. "It's nice out, don't you think?" Nami said to the baby in her hands. The baby didn't seem all that interested. Instead, she released another whine, showing she was still unhappy. Nami also became unhappy. What was she going to do with her unhappy child? "Maybe I should wake up Luffy," Nami thought out loud. "Mrs. Nami, are you alright?" Nami looked down on the lower deck to find Brook looking up at her. His voice showed he was concerned for her. "Hello Brook, this little one doesn't seem to want to fall asleep." As Nami gestured to her baby, Mika gave another whine, showing her displeasure. Nami sighed as she rocked the baby, trying to calm her down. Brook gave a light-hearted laugh. "Ah, babies are quite miraculous. One moment they can sleep all day, then the next they won't sleep at all. And this one certainly doesn't want to sleep," Nami said in a displeased tone as she stared at her unhappy child. "If I may suggest," Nami looked back over at Brook, interested in what the skeleton had to suggest. Seeing he had Nami's full attention, he continued, "Have you tired a lullaby?" Nami looked at Brook stunned. Why hadn't she thought of that? She had heard of mothers singing babies to sleep. She would hit herself if she didn't have her sweet baby in her hands. Instead, she just grunted in frustration. Why did I not think of that? "Yo ho ho ho, you are tired, Mrs. Nami. It is an easy thing to forget, but you have us. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child." "I guess you're right." Nami looked down at Mika, who was still looking unhappy. Nami then got an idea. "Brook, could you help me with the lullaby?" "It would be my pleasure." Brook then brought out his violin ready to play. Nami walked over to the skeleton and whispered into his ear. Aw. But I don't have ears because I'm all bones. Yo-ho-ho. Skull joke. Brooke smiled, wonderful choice. Thanks. Nami then looked back down on her daughter, showing the baby her soft smile. The baby was still unhappy and looked to be ready to cry. Brooke immediately began to play a soft tune. Nami waited for just a moment, began swaying gently, and then began to sing softly. Say what you will, I find this perfect for the occasion. Baby mine, don't you cry. Baby mine, try your tears. Mika began to relax a little, though still looking unhappy. Nami then brought the small baby close to her chest near her heart. She continued to sway back and forth. Rest your head close to my heart, never to part, baby of mine. Little one, when you play, don't you mind what they say. Let those eyes sparkle and shine, never a tear, baby of mine. If they knew sweet little you, they'd end up loving you too. All of those people who scold you, what they'd give just for the right to hold you. From your head down to your toes, you're not much, goodness knows. But you're so precious to me, sweet as can be, baby of mine. If they knew sweet little you, they'd end up loving you too. All those same people who scold you, what they'd give just for the right to hold you. From your head down to your toes, you're not much, goodness knows. But you're so precious to me, sweet as can be, baby of mine. Baby of mine. Nami and Brooke both finished the lullaby. Nami brought the baby off her chest to check if Mika was asleep. To Nami's delight, Mika was now sleeping peacefully. Nami sighed in relief. Finally, she fell asleep. Nami suddenly felt a bony finger. She turned to see Brooke pointing off to the side. Ah, Mrs. Nami, she isn't the only one. Nami looked over to where Brooke was pointing towards. To her shock, all the men were now sleeping on the grassy deck. She couldn't believe it. Whatever, I'm going to put Mika back in her crib and then go to bed. Without a care, Nami walked towards her room. Good night, Mrs. Nami. Good night, little Mika. Brooke saw the two off and returned to his night duty. He decided that his crew would sleep best undisturbed. A few months passed by and the crew has adjusted to their new lifestyle. Sleeping at night became much easier, both due to Mika crying less at night and the men's ability to adapt. Mika is now 4.5 months old, and the crew had since left the previous island for a new summer island. The crew had docked at a cove with a beautiful beach well hidden from the town nearby. Thusly, this day became a beach day. Each having fun and enjoying a break from the high seas. Nami sat under the umbrella with Mika in her special seat, which was closely similar to Sunny's figurehead. Robin sat nearby reading a book. Most of the guys were playing games or having competitions. Occasionally, someone came to visit with Mika. Again, it was mostly Luffy. For the 50th time, Luffy was visiting with Nami and Mika. Hi, Mika. How's my little princess doing? Mika didn't respond much from a random arm and leg movement and a smile. For Luffy, that was enough for him. Nami watched on, finding the whole thing precious, though a little annoying. In a sense, she was a little jealous since Luffy hardly spoke to her when he came to visit. So, Nami decided to speak. Hello, Captain. Luffy looked over to Nami with a plain expression. He already knew he was in some kind of trouble by how she addressed him. Robin chuckled watching the interaction. Luffy tried to converse with Nami. Hi, my sweet Mikan. Oh, now you notice me, Nami said with a huff, crossing her arms. Nami. Luffy moved closer to Nami, trying to plead with her. Then Usopp shouted, watch out, Nami. Robin and Luffy turned to see a ball come hurtling towards them. The ball hit Luffy directly at the face, causing the man to fall back. Nami and Robin gasped in surprise. The crew, who were playing volleyball, stood frozen in shock. Eventually the ball fell off Luffy's face, leaving a large red mark. No one moved or spoke. Until suddenly there came a giggle. It was incredibly soft and loud, and it didn't come from any adult. Everyone turned to look at Mika to see her smiling and laughing. The whole crew's jaw dropped. That was precious. Nami shouted in excitement as she crawled over to Mika and picked the baby girl up. She then began to lightly hug the girl. That was the cutest laugh I've ever heard. That was the first time she laughed, said Chopper as he rushed over to Nami, excited as well. Brook joined Chopper as he came to Nami's side. Ah, it was sweetest thing my ears have ever heard. But I have no ears because I'm dead. Yo ho ho ho, skull joke. What's the big deal? It's just a laugh. Zoro seemed to be completely confused. Sanji muttered angrily, TCH. Shitty swordsman, like you would understand. That laugh was of a pure angel. Laugh again, little sis, Frankie shouted as he joined the others circling around Nami and Mika. Luffy finally stood back up and quickly joined the group. Mika looked around wondering what the adults were doing around her. She then spotted her father grinning at her. Luffy shouted, "Here, Mika. Watch." Mika watched as Luffy grabbed both of his cheeks, stretched them, and made silly faces. Mika instantly laughed. The whole crew, minus one confused Zoro, gushed over the laughing baby. Robin watched on as most of the crew was now trying to get Mika to laugh. It amused her that something so minuscule could attract so much attention. Though, she too liked to hear the baby laugh. Another few months pass since their beach vacation. The crew had been to one other island. They had landed on a winter island, and indoors was where Mika, now 7 months old, stayed for all time. By her 6th month, Nami began allowing the crew, some more than others, to watch her child while she did other stuff or while on night watch. Mika had begun to sit up by herself and began playing with many of her toys that she'd been gathering increasingly. She had also taken a liking to throwing toys at her family members for her amusement. No idea where that came from. Wink, wink, check the happy birthday special. On this day, Nami and Luffy had gone on one of their rare dates, which they hadn't had time for in many months. See you guys later. Usopp shouted from the sunny with Mika in his arm, both wrapped in winter clothes, as he waved Luffy and Nami off. Mika was doing the same, having learned the connection rather recently. Bye guys, shouted Luffy walking backwards while waving. Don't stay outside too long, Mika is not used to the cold, shouted Nami, still worried for her daughter. She'll be fine. Just go, Usopp shouted back, annoyed. With the couple finally out of sight, Usopp brought Mika back inside. He took her to the men's room where most of the crew was currently in a card game. Did they finally leave? Zoro spoke to the sniper from his seat at the table. It sure took them long enough. After taking their coats off, Usopp then sat Mika down in her special play area in the corner of the room. The baby girl squealed in delight as she grabbed one of her toys. He then looked over to Zoro and spoke, I know, she just kept telling me more stuff about what not to do with Mika. Can you blame her? Frankie said as he played cards with Chopper, Brook and Sanji. Nami's sis is leaving as her and Straw Hat's child. Any mother would worry. What's there to worry about? We can keep an eye on a little baby. Usopp said confidently as he took his seat with the others to play cards. Chopper nodded in agreement. I agree. Mika can only sit up, she won't be able to move around. And the little angel is incredibly vocal, Sanji said with a smile as he placed a card down. We'd be the most incompetent pirates and family members ever, Brook added as he too placed a card, which immediately was met with dissatisfied groans. The group of men continued playing cards and having a good time. Occasionally, one of them would check on Mika. Always the little girl was playing with one of her toys. Whenever she spotted one of them looking at her, she waved to that person, and in return that person did as well with a joyful smile. However, their period of checking soon grew longer until they stopped altogether. With an occasionally coo from Mika, they believed to be in the clear. It was dark outside as Sanji began to reshuffle the cards and then deal them out. Not a single sound was made. The whole crew found that odd. It's quiet, said Chopper. Zoro sat up straight, feeling a bit tense. Yeah, too quiet. Why hasn't Mika made a sound? The group of men turned to the corner where Usopp had last left Mika. The little baby was not in her play area. The entire group gasped. What? Where did Mika go? Shouted Usopp in utter shock. How could that baby just disappear? Said Sanji as he looked under the table. Ah, look, hearing Chopper. The crew looked to see the reindeer pointing to the door leading outside. The door was open. The group shouted, no way. They all rushed outside. They immediately began to look around for the little girl. How did she get out? Said Frankie as he looked in one direction. She must have just learned to crawl, shouted Chopper as he looked in another direction. They were lucky that it hadn't snowed, though it would have helped in stopping her. It would also make her sick. Brook then offered a suggestion. Let's split up, we are bound to. What are you guys doing? The entire group froze and turned around. Now on the deck was Luffy and Nami, the latter of who was looking very upset. Luffy just watched on confused. The group of men, despite it being cold, broke into a sweat. Sanji bravely spoke up with a smile. "And Nami, Luffy, what are you doing back so soon?" Nami frowned. "Our date is over. What are you doing outside?" Frankie gulped as he spoke. Nothing much, girly." Nami raised her brow. "Really, because it looks like you were looking for something." "What? Of course not. What would give you that idea?" said Usopp, trying to cover for the group. Before Nami could ask another question, the door to the aquarium room opened. Everyone turned to see Robin walking out with Mika in her arms, nibbling on Robin's sleeve. Robin looked at the men and then turned to Luffy and Nami. "Oh, you have returned from your date," Robin said amusedly. Seeing his little girl, Luffy ran over to Robin with a grin, shouting, "Mika, Mommy and Daddy are back." Mika heard her father and stopped biting on Robin's sleeve. She made cooing sounds as she stretched out her hands towards her father. Robin happily handed the baby to Luffy. Once in hand, read big smile. Instantly, Nami's mood lightened up. The group of men felt immediate relief seeing that they were not in trouble and Mika was safe. Whispering, the group of men spoke in relief. "Phew, she's safe." "How is she? She didn't give you too much trouble, right?" asked Nami to Robin as she walked up next to her fiancé. Robin shook her head. "No, she was a perfect angel." Nami smiled and patted her daughter on the head. However, Robin wasn't done. "At least, her time with me she was good." Nami turned back to Robin, surprised. "What do you mean?" The men started to get nervous. "Well, I guess the boys must have needed her out because she came crawling into the aquarium all by herself. I guess she learned how to crawl." Robin continued as she gave Mika a little tickle. The baby instantly laughs and then grabbed the woman's finger. Luffy gasped, "Wow, that's amazing." "Yes, it is." Nami was just as happy as Luffy was for their daughter. She gave a smile to her daughter, who returned with her own smile. However, she then looked over to the group of men. "But why was my daughter crawling in the first place?" All the guys went into a nervous sweat and remained silent. Nami didn't like the silence, and so she glared at them. Robin and Luffy were also curious as to why they were being so quiet. Nami then spoke in a low and threatening tone. "Well." Sanji stepped forward with a suave smile. "Now Nami, we can explain." Bam 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 bam. Sanji as well as the other 5 males were immediately met with Nami's fist. Giving them no time to explain, Nami could already guess what had happened. The men lay in crumpled heap. Robin stood by, not even batting an eye. And Luffy just felt sorry for his crew. On the other hand, Mika was giggling, finding the whole thing funny. A few more months passed. Mika was becoming quite the little troublemaker. As the crew watched Mika's development, they soon realized that the little baby girl was taking after her father a little more than her mother. A big indication was her appetite, discovered early on when Mika could start eating food, albeit mashed food. Around her 9th month, Mika began eating finger foods on her own, though with supervision. Her habit of throwing stuff had yet to be quelled. Food fights started almost every day. With her learning how to crawl, leaving Mika alone or taking their eyes off her would be a big problem. This combined with her newfound hand coordination and crawling, she was a small force to be reckoned with. And her new favorite toy was her father. Seeing how his whole body was rubber, pulling on his finger and face was fun. Luffy laughed. She, Nami watch. Trying to sunbathe, Nami looked from her seat. Luffy was playing with Mika on the grass deck nearby. Mika sat in front of Luffy playing with some of her toys when Luffy stuck out his finger. "Here Mika, pull my finger." Mika dropped whatever toy she had and grabbed the man's finger. She then pulled on it with all her little might, causing her to fall over softly. Luffy laughed. "You're so silly, Mika." Nami rolled her eyes. "She isn't the only one." Luffy chuckled and then continued to play with Mika. Nami returned to sunbathing. Mika let go of Luffy's finger, letting it return to normal. Mika then looked over to the side and saw her mother. She instantly took an interest and started crawling over to her. Luffy frowned, though quickly smiled seeing where she was going. Little Mika crawled over her mother's chair with remarkable speed. Once she reached it, she placed her hand on the bar and lifted herself up. Nami didn't notice, so Mika walked down the chair and then placed her hand on her mother's skin. Nami was surprised by the sudden touch. She sat up to see who was touching her, but smiled when she saw that it was her daughter. "Hey there, cutie. Are you having fun?" The little girl looked at her mother with a curious gaze only to shift into a bright smile. "And look at you, standing up on your own," Nami said proudly. "I think she wants mommy to play too." Nami looked over hearing Luffy. The young captain looked to be practically begging for her to play with him. She giggled and decided to a little fun. She acted to be in thought for only a minute and then smiled. "Well, if she really wants me to." Nami swung her legs over the chair and scooped the baby into her arms. The baby squealed in delight as her mother tickled her. Luffy watched on with a smile. He was glad to see Nami having fun. She deserved to have a fun, especially with how much she puts up, him included. But seeing his wife-to-be and daughter having fun without him made him feel left out. He stood up and rushed over to his two favorite girls. "Hey, mind if I join?" asked Luffy with a grin. Nami stopped tickling Mika and turned to Luffy. He looked like her really wanted to join. Nami then got a fun idea. She made her expression out to look unamused at him. "I believe you said that Mika wanted to play with mommy, not daddy." "What?" Luffy gasped in shock. Nami giggled. She then turned to her daughter and sat her up. "What do you think, sweetie? Should we let daddy play with us?" Though she had no clue what her mother was saying, Mika smiled and babbled with excitement. Nami smiled and turned towards Luffy, who was still in shock. "Okay, Luffy, you can play." Luffy blinked and then grinned happily. "Yay!" Luffy shouted in joy and then tackled Nami and Mika. Nami was easily caught off guard and all the two adults landed on the ground with Mika safe in Nami's arms. Luffy's hat even fell off his head, though landing on his body as the two adults stared at each other. "Luffy, that was reckless. You could have—" Nami was about to scold Luffy when she was interrupted by Mika's laughing and giggling. She was surprised to her laughing when something so sudden would more than likely scare any baby. I guess that's something she inherited from Luffy. Laughing in the face of danger. Luffy laughed. "Sorry, Nami. I'll try to be more careful." "You better," Nami said, scolding Luffy sternly. Luffy flashed a smile towards Nami, causing her to blush lightly. Nami didn't realize this immediately, but both she and Luffy were pretty close to each other, practically touching skin. They both found it quite natural, oddly, even with Mika fidgeting on Nami's chest. They were even looking at each other, like they plus Mika were the only people on the ship. Of course, they were not. And speaking of, most of the crew was hardly paying attention. This kind of interaction between captain and navigator had now become quite a regular part of the crew's life. Even Sanji, despite his jealousy, tried not to interfere as much. Back to the couple. Luffy made a bold move and gave Nami a chaste kiss. Nami's blush intensified. What was that about, Luffy?" Nami said, stuttering in embarrassment. Luffy just chuckled. "Nothing, I just love you and Mika is all." Nami smiled, but rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, if that's all." Nami then leaned forward and kissed her captain back. Luffy was surprised, but kissed back immediately. As they two kissed, Luffy suddenly felt his hat come off his body. He broke the kiss and lifted his head up. Nami did the same, wondering what was going on. Both of them were surprised to see Mika now holding Luffy's straw hat in her tiny hands and nibbling on it a bit. When she found the hat inedible, she then decided to place it on her head. Both Luffy and Nami laughed. The hat was far too big for the little baby girl, but it was the most adorable thing ever. "Looks like you have a little more competition, Luffy," Nami said jokingly as she sat up, being careful not to knock the baby off. Luffy laughed and then sat up as well. He grinned. "No way, she'll destroy me." Hearing this, Nami smirked. "Oh really?" Luffy turned to Nami, seeing her devious smirk. He watched as Nami stood their daughter up and held her little arms. "Let's beat daddy, Mika, baby punch." Nami made Mika send a punch towards her father. It connected. "Ah, I'm hit, I am defeated." Playing along, Luffy fell back, withering in fake pain. The action then clapped her hands. Luffy and Nami joined Mika in laughing. It was just one big, happy family. "Oh, you're just in time. Today is a very special day, and I wouldn't want you to miss it." To the day. Not literally. It has been 1 full year since Mika was born. A little wonder child that somehow enlightened and tortured the Straw Hat crew. Being her mother, Nami wanted everything to be perfect for her daughter's first birthday. She's not gonna remember this, Zoro stated rather annoyed. His answer was met with Nami's fist as she shouted, "Don't ruin this for me." Since then, no one questioned the idea. It was now the morning of Mika's first birthday, and the sun was beginning to rise. Most of the crew was still asleep. The only one awake at this hour was Robin, who had night duty after taking over for Zoro. Once Robin had finished her book, she noticed the sun rising and began to clean up her reading area. She left the library and walked towards the women's room. As she crossed the deck, she caught something out of the corner of her eye. She peered out towards the ocean to see a small raft speeding towards them. As she walked up to the edge of the Sunny, she had made it at the same time as the raft drifted next to their boat. On the boat was a grinning, freckled face, young man with long black hair with an orange hat and without a shirt. Thanks to him being shirtless, Robin instantly recognized the Jolly Roger tattooed on his back. It was the Jolly Roger of the Whitebeard Pirates. Robin was a bit alarmed, but remained composed. "Hello, may I help you?" "Hello, my name is Portgas D. Ace," Ace said politely. "This wouldn't happen to be the Straw Hat Pirates led by Monkey D. Luffy, is it?" "It is," Robin said plainly. Ace grinned. "Good, then can you wake him up and tell him his brother is here to see him?" Robin looked at Ace surprised. She didn't know her captain had a brother, let alone one from the Whitebeard Pirates. However, she did know of Portgas D. Ace, the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. She then smiled. Today would quite an interesting day. She then crossed her arms and activated her powers. Ace watched on with a curious gaze, wondering what the woman was doing. He then heard a door open. "What is it, Robin?" said a rather tired Luffy. Robin smiled. "We have a visitor." "Really?" said Luffy in surprise. Deciding he had waited enough, Ace jumped from his raft and landed on the railing. Luffy was instantly surprised. Ace then waved to his little brother. "Hey, long time no see, Luffy." "Ace!" shouted Luffy joyfully. "What are you doing here?" Ace stood up and stepped off the railing. "Well, when I heard that the Straw Hat Pirates haven't been active in well over a year, I thought that something had to be up." Luffy chuckled and scratched his cheek rather bashfully. "Actually." A door opened up again. Out came Usopp looking tired. He called out, "Hey Luffy, why'd you wake up so early?" Behind him came Brook holding his violin and bow. "Indeed, I haven't even played yet." Luffy turned with a big smile. "Hey, Ace is here." Usopp gasped in surprise. "What? Ace?" Ace gave the long-nosed man a wave and spoke, "Hey Usopp." He then noticed the skeleton behind the sniper. To say the least, he was surprised. He then leaned towards Luffy speaking softly. "Looks like you got more than just a new ship." "Huh? Oh, that's Brook. He's our musician," Luffy said with a grin. "He's also a skeleton." Ace nodded. "I noticed. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ace." Brook approached Ace and gave him a handshake. Ace politely shook back, though a little nervous. "Hey guys. Ace is here." Ace looked around the tall skeleton to hear Usopp shouting back into the room. In no time more of the Straw Hats came out. Ace recognized 3 of them, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper. But he was not familiar with the blue-haired man with large forearms. "Hey, welcome back," Zoro said with friendly smile. "Who is this?" said Frankie as he lifted his sunglasses up, observing the young man before him. Sanji took out a cigarette and spoke, "He's Luffy's brother." "Straw Hat has a brother?" said Frankie in shock. "Yeah, Frankie, he's so cool," said Chopper in an excited tone. "Need a light?" asked Ace as he held his finger up. A small flame lit up Sanji's cigarette. Sanji took a quick puff and then replied, "Thanks." Oh, both Chopper and Frankie were amazed by Ace's trick. "I recall there was 1 or 2 more. Or did the princess not join?" asked Ace looking to Luffy. "Vivi? No, she decided to stay at her home," Luffy said with a smile. Ace nodded, understanding his brother. "Then, that leaves." Ace was stopped as another door opened. On the deck above the men's room, Nami came out of the women's room. She looked to be very irritated. What is everyone yelling and shouting about? All but Robin flinched with Nami's shout. Even Ace found the orange-haired navigator to be scary. Ace leaned over to Luffy. "She seems scarier than last time." "Yeah, some things have changed since last time," Luffy replied with a nervous smile. "Like what?" Ace asked curiously. Luffy thought about it for a minute. but then had an idea. As Nami reached the bottom of the stairs, she was surprised to see Ace. Luffy then rushed over to Nami. "Ace, what are you MMMPF?" As Nami tried to speak, her lips were immediately caught by Luffy's lips. Ace was caught completely off guard. The crew either found the sight amusing or annoying. Eventually, Luffy broke away from the now dazed Nami. He then turned to his shocked brother wearing a big grin. "I like you to meet my finance, Nami." Nami rolled her eyes, but smiled. "It's fiancé, Luffy dear." Luffy replied with a chuckle. Ace finally snapped out of his shocked state. He then turned to the crew pointing a finger at the couple. He spoke out dumbly, "Since when?" Zoro replied, "A year." Ace gasped. "Actually, they've been together for 8 months before Luffy proposed." Usopp said in a matter-of-factly. Ace completely lost his breath. Despite hearing from some of the crew, Ace still didn't believe it. He spoke dumbly once again. "How?" "I think they've had feelings for each other for a while beforehand," stated Robin. Ace nodded in agreement. "Well, I knew that. They were just too stubborn or dense to admit it." Nami and Luffy looked at Ace in anger and shouted, "Hey!" "Then the best answer is they had a little incentive," Robin said with a soft smile. Ace looked curiously at the woman. The way she had stated that sentence seemed to catch his attention. He asked, "What kind?" On cue, there came a soft cry. Ace was instantly paralyzed as well as confused by this new sound. He looked around seeing that most of the crew wasn't worried. He then looked over to his brother and apparent fiancé. Both of them looked at each other concerned. "I'll go." And like that, Luffy left Nami's side and ran up into the women's room. It was only a mere 10 seconds later when the cry went away only to be replaced by Luffy, "Nami." Nami shook her head. "After all this time, you still can't handle it, men." Nami then went up to her room to assist Luffy. Ace was still stunned by the sound. He then looked back the crew. "What was that?" The whole crew smiled. Sanji then spoke, "Our newest nakama." Ace didn't understand what the chef meant. He then turned back to the door only to see Luffy and Nami walking back down. Only Luffy was holding a baby. Ace blinked once, then twice, and then he even rubbed his eyes. He definitely wasn't seeing things, and he couldn't believe it. Once the couple had reached the bottom of the stairs, Ace immediately approached looking completely stunned. "Luffy, that's..." Luffy heard his brother and grinned. He then held up his 1-year-old daughter showing her to Ace. "Ace, meet your niece, Maya Nami's daughter, Monkey D. Namika. But we like to call her Mika for short," Nami added for clearance. Ace and Mika stared out each other. Having just met, Ace wasn't sure what to say. Mika was just looking over this new stranger wondering what he'll do. Luffy then brought Mika closer to his body as he spoke to her. "Mika, this is your uncle Ace. Wave high like you doy," then waved his hand. Instantly, Mika followed her father's movement with added baby gibberish words. "I can't believe," said Ace absent-mindedly. Zoro chuckled. "Sometimes we can't either. I mean, it's just unreal." Ace continued still completely in shock. "Don't worry, Straw Hats bro, you came at a wonderful time. Today is little sis Mika's first super birthday," shouted Frankie with excitement. "Really?" said Ace in surprise. "Yeah, you should join us," said Luffy getting excited. Mika mimicked her father showing how excited she was as well, even though she didn't know why. After finally getting over the surprise, Ace smiled and chuckled. "Well, I did come here to pass a message, but I can stay for a little bit." "Yay!" shouted the crew cheerfully. And so, the official, Mika's first birthday party extravaganza began a little earlier than planned. Zoro in particular was fearful of Nami's scolding for whatever reason. With a delightful surprise visit from Ace, not a single Straw Hat could say that this wouldn't be memorable for Mika. While originally planning to begin around noon, the party was able to last to that time and further. Despite not recognizing it as such, Mika was enjoying her party. Every last one of her family was playing her. "Luffy. Peek," said Luffy covering his face. Immediately, Mika was looking all around wondering where her father went to. He then removed his hands from his face, wearing a huge grin. "A boo!" the little baby girl squealed in delight. "Zoro. Hey! Watch it!" shouted Zoro as he dodged another toy. This was definitely not Zoro's idea of spending time with his figurative niece. In fact, he was just gonna nap with her. Unfortunately, Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper halted such task by handing Mika her toys. As everyone laughed at Zoro and Mika's antics, the green-haired swordsman was getting irritated. "Shut up, assholes." Nami's fist immediately impacted the top of Zoro's head a second later. "Don't cuss in front of my baby girl." Zoro clenched his teeth in anger and frustration. Mika clapped and giggled in joy. "Nami. Look how pretty you are." For Nami, she wanted Mika to try on several cute baby outfits she had found in town. For this outfit, Mika was wearing probably the most frilly baby dress a baby girl could have. Mika didn't seem to mind, especially when everyone blew it up to be like a fashion shot. "Work it, little sis." In front of Mika, Frankie, Sanji, and Brooke were taking pictures. Nami dressed her, and then led the little one-year-old walk towards her uncles, being very curious. With a bright smile, Luffy and Chopper were cheering on for Mika. Usopp was announcing, and Robin and Ace were strangely critiquing the whole thing. And the next thing our ultra-famous, superstar, fashion model Mika N is wearing is a lovely spring day dress best for a spring island any time of season. Usopp said, announcing through the transponder snail announcement system. Robin was actually seriously critiquing. "I think it's far too revealing for a girl her age. Also, there are far too many bright colors. I suggest a midnight black scarf." Ace seemed a little lost on the whole thing. Is this really necessary? The whole crew stopped. All of them thought about it for a minute before someone finally answered. "You know, I think he's right," Sanji said, surprising the group. He then smiled. "Mika Schwan is cute in anything." The whole crew agreed. Ace wasn't sure what was going on as Mika crawled over her uncle. "Luffy again." "Mika, watch this," shouted Luffy as he sat his daughter in front. Mika watched her father curiously. Luffy stepped back, making sure there was plenty of room. He then shouted, "Gum gum balloon." Luffy then sucked in some air and bloated himself. Mika was instantly astonished and began clapping and laughing. Luffy chuckled though kept his mouth shut. Usopp. "Wait, Luffy. Keep that up for a few minutes," Usopp shouted as he picked up Mika and walked over to Luffy. The Straw Hat Captain watched confused. Usopp then sneakily tripped Luffy, making him land on his back. Usopp then jumped onto Luffy's bloated stomach and he bounced with Mika in hand. Mika was enjoying this new experience. Luffy was trying with all his might not to open his mouth. Along with the crew, Ace laughed at the sight, banging his hand on the table. "Sanji. And next for your birthday luncheon, we have this lovely array of cooked carrots, small cut mike and rabbits, with small cuts of fine meat." Sanji spoke in a gentleman-like manner as he served food to Mika. Mika immediately went into eating her food, first the mike and rabbits and then the meat. She didn't look too interested in the carrots. Nami then stepped in and tried to get her daughter to eat. "Come on, princess, you need to eat all your food if you want your cake later." Sanji turned his head towards the rest of the table. "That goes for the rest of you idiots." Luffy and Usopp shouted in shock, "Ah, what?" Both wouldn't eat particular items that Sanji had cooked up. For Luffy it was anything that wasn't meat or fruit. Usopp had a disliking for peppers, onions, and carrots, get it? No one else had a problem with their food. Ace, eating his food politely, gave his brother a slap behind the head. "Come on, you need to show your daughter how to eat healthy." Luffy grumbled incoherently as he then began to eat some of his vegetables. Nami smiled as she had watched the scene. "Now maybe I can get him to stop stealing food." "Hey!" shouted Zoro as Luffy stole some of his rice balls. Nami sighed, if only. Unfortunately, Nami didn't notice that Mika had watched the whole act. There's no way she could pick up such a habit, right? "Luffy, again?" Both Luffy and Mika were sleeping, both having the comical sleep bubble coming out of their noses. Everyone seems to also be in siesta as they just hung around the ship talking. Zoro was finally getting that nap he wanted earlier. "Chopper." Mika laughed out in joy as she rode Chopper around in walk point. With Nami walking beside her as a precaution, the little one-year-old had nothing to worry about. She even petted Chopper, probably not realizing that he was the furry little man or the giant man she had seen many times before. "Oh, me next," Me next, Usopp and Luffy shouted from their imaginary line as if going on a kiddie ride. Chopper shot his head around in anger. I'm not a petting zoo. Robin. Now this is an apple. Can you say apple? Said Robin as she held a simple picture book and sat with Mika reading it to her. Mika tried to say it. Appfff. Robin shook her head, but smiled. Close. She then continued to the next word. Observing from afar, Ace turned to the others with a curious look. So, you're also teaching Mika? Nami shook her head firm, of course. No daughter of mine will go uneducated. Like a lot of idiots on this boat. Hey! Shouted much of the crew taking offense. Robin heard the commotion, but ignored it. She then continued on to the next word. Try saying, flower. FLLLLL, said Mika as she tried to grab the picture of the flower. Robin then turned the page. How about nakama? Asked Robin. Again, Mika tried to reply. Nah, the next word is, Robin. Suddenly the whole party stood up, shocking Ace. Hey! We agreed to, no names, as one of Mika's first words. Shouted Usopp, pointing an accusing finger at the archaeologist. Robin giggled. Oh my, how did that word get in? Luff. Oi. Stop hogging your daughter, and let someone else have another turn, Sanji shouted. Luffy pouted as he held his daughter protectively. No, he then stuck his tongue out. Sanji clenched his teeth. Why you? Luffy then took off running with daughter in hand. Sanji immediately gave chase. Nami sighed and shrugged her shoulders. Ace watched on, laughing the whole time. Frankie. Ow. It's time for the best gift of all, shouted Frankie confidently as he brought out something large but hidden under cover. Everyone gave the cyborg a curious stare. Nami shouted, you better not be something ridiculous that fiscate later. Nah, it's nothing like that, Frankie said defensively. Frankie then grabbed the sheet and grinned. It's something that's gonna be super. Frankie then pulled off the sheet. The crew and Ace gasped in surprise as under the sheet was a stroller buggy that looked much like the Sunny, only on 4 small wheels. Immediately Luffy, with Mika in hand, Usopp, and Chopper rushed over to get a closer look at the gift. Speechless herself, Nami followed to observe the gift. As they circled the stroller buggy, the 3 men gushed in excitement. It's so cool, yeah, said Nami suspiciously. Yes, this week's me was super great. I present the little Sunny baby battle buggy, shouted Frankie with pride and joy. Nami gasped, battle buggy, are you expecting my daughter to fight? No way, girly. It's just part of the name to make super, said Frankie, trying to calm down the anger mother. Nami calmed down, but was still glaring at the cyborg. Sanji walked up to Buggy and gave it a soft kick. Exactly, what does this baby buggy do, Frankie? Glad you asked. Frankie walked over to Mika and then placed her in the buggy. The little girl looked around her seat, wondering what she was in. Frankie then continued to explain. The little buggy can do a lot, press the big button, little sis. Following Frankie's finger, Mika looked at the button and then pressed. Suddenly the head of the little lion made a noise. Roar. The lion head spoke mightily. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper gushed over the feature. So cool. Well, that's nice, Nami said as she watched her daughter happily play in the buggy. Frankie grinned. There's still more. The cyborg pushed a button that was on the handlebar. Suddenly the sides of the buggy began to inflate. A little sail also popped up just behind her. Mika cooed in interest. It can float, shouted the immature trio, even more amazed than before. That is pretty handy, I guess, Nami said as she conceded to the brilliance that was Frankie's gift. Mika was definitely enjoying her gift. Excuse me, Mr. Frankie, what does this button do? Asked Brook as he was already in process of pressing the button. Skeleton bro, wait. Before Frankie could stop him, Brook pushed the button. Suddenly the little Sunny's paws made a clicking noise. Both paws then shot out, hitting Luffy and Usopp at the same time, sending them both off the ship. Most of the crew was surprised. After the initial shock, Nami turned back to Frankie in anger and shouted, "Not a weapon, my ass. It's just a precaution in case you two get into trouble," Frankie said nervously. Suddenly there came another click. The little Sunny head launched forward and literally chomped down on Chopper. "Ah! Get it off! Get it off. Chopper immediately started running around with the lion head squarely fixed on his hat. In doing so, he also began dragging Mika with him. Mika was actually pretty happy with the action. However, the action just made Nami even angrier. This week's Frankie just went from super great to super dead. Brooke. After getting over the shock of the little sunny battle baby buggy, which Nami decided to keep only due to its actual usefulness, Brooke decided to calm the mood over. He began playing gentle tunes that Mika played along with a few of her instruments that she had. While annoying, the crew and Ace enjoyed the music that the two musicians played. And at last, it was the end of each member's personal time with the birthday girl. It is now evening and the birthday celebration was still going on. Mika had survived her ordeal of family members and come out triumphant. Nami and Robin sat off to the side with Mika on her mother's lap as she ate her food. Ace soon joined her, having already exhausted himself. The others were still enjoying themselves. "Excuse me." Robin soon excused herself as she went away to whatever she was doing. Nami and Ace remained seated as they watched the others. Neither one said a word to the other. "You know, this is the most unusual crew I've either seen," Ace said out of nowhere. Nami turned to Ace surprised, but then giggled. "Is it the talking reindeer, the cyborg, or the living skeleton that makes our crew unusual?" Ace chuckled. "Well, those are unusual, but I was thinking more along the line of you have a baby on board and no one seems to mind." Nami looked at Ace a little peeved. "And what's wrong with that?" Ace raised his hands up defensively, wearing a nervous smile. "Nothing, it's just that everyone is acting more like a family than pirates. We're free to do and act however we want," Nami said confidently. Ace was a little surprised to Nami's answer. The young navigator then turned to Ace. "And don't think you're excluded either, brother-in-law. I'm expecting you to show your face around here every now and then. I want Mika to know all her family." Ace chuckled. "I get it. I'll be sure to swing around once in a while." Nami nodded. "Good, then you can start now." Nami then handed her daughter over to Ace. The man was surprised but took the little girl absently. Mika immediately began cheering as she was held by her uncle. Ace was a little nervous holding his niece, though put up a smile. He then looked over to Nami saying, "I'm not all that great with kids." "That's okay, neither is Zoro," Nami said without a doubt. Ace chuckled, agreeing with Nami as he recalled the earlier day's event. As he watched his brother and crew have fun, his expression suddenly became serious. "Do you love him?" Nami looked at Ace in surprise. "What, do you love Luffy?" Ace said again, this time turning his head towards Nami. "He's not just the father of your child, or simply a means to an end." The young woman was surprised by the sudden tone of seriousness. She would never have expected Ace to get so stern. It made her pretty angry. "I love Luffy. He may be a bit simple at times, incredibly reckless, and sometimes he puts food ahead of everything, but even then I still love him." Ace raised his brow. "Really?" "Yes. He's done so much for me, things I probably couldn't ever repay, and our love, our daughter, I would never want to lose any of it," Nami said confidently and serious. Not once was she faltering in her speech. Ace then smiled. "Good." Nami looked at Ace surprised again. Ace handed Mika back to her mother. "I'm glad my brother could find someone like you to love." Nami smiled. "I'm glad I fell in love with Luffy." "Thanks, Nami." Not being Ace's voice, Nami turned around to see Luffy. He was grinning, even bigger and happier than usual. While Nami was surprised that her fiancé was not playing, Ace let out a small chuckle. With a laugh of his own, Luffy then hugged his wife to be along with his daughter. He then spoke, "I'm happy that I fell in love with you too." Nami giggled. "You knucklehead." Then there came a shout, "Hey, if the lovebirds are done." Luffy, Nami, and Ace turned back to the crowd to see all of the crew, including Robin, done with their fun. Zoro then spoke again. "We got to eat the cake." Luffy immediately got excited. "Is it ready?" "You bet." Sanji stepped out of the crowd carrying a fairly large cake with only one candle in the middle. As everyone gathered around the table, Sanji placed the cake in front of Mika, who was eyeing the large confection curiously. "Would you do the honor, Ace?" asked Nami, gesturing to the cake. She then stopped Mika grabbing the cake. "You need to wait, little birthday girl." Ace chuckled. "It would be my pleasure." Ace extended his hand, touched the wick, instantly setting it on fire. On cue, Brook began playing his violin. Everyone then began to sing, "Happy birthday to you." "Cha-cha-cha," shouted Luffy, Usopp, Chopper, and Brook cheerfully. They then continued with the others as they sang, "Happy birthday to you." The same group then shouted, "Cha-cha-cha, happy birthday dear Mika." "Cha-cha-cha, happy birthday to you, Kanpei," shouted the whole crew in one big cheer. Though the little baby wasn't sure what was going on, she too cheered. "Now, blow out the candle Mika," Nami said as she brought a Mika. The little baby only stared at the flame in interest. Usopp then sneakily tickled the little girl's nose with a feather, causing her to sneeze, thus blowing the candle. "Yay!" shouted most of the crew, even if she really didn't the candle on her own. Robin smiled and clapped. Sanji then brought out a knife. "Okay, who gets the first piece?" "I think, Ace," shouted an unfamiliar voice. The entire group went silent as they then looked at Mika. The little girl was looking at her uncle with a smile as she raised her hands towards him. She then shouted again, "Ace, Ace." The crew was speechless. Ace couldn't believe his ears. He then laughed, "I can't believe it." "Oh my Oda," Mika said her first word. Nami gushed over her little daughter's accomplishment. She then turned to Luffy. "Don't you think that's amazing, Luffy?" When Nami turned to her fiancé, she found him and all the male members of the crew on their hands and knees with a dark cloud over their heads. All of them looked miserable. "Little Mika's first word," said Brook numbly. "It was so precious, but," muttered Sanji in tears. "It wasn't the word I wanted." The entire group said the same line, though each had something different in mind as to what Mika's first word would be. Luffy wanted her to say, "Dada," or, "meat." Zoro wanted, "swords." Usopp was hoping for, "uncle," or maybe, "great Captain Uncle Usopp." Sanji had been planning for when she would say, "Mikan." Chopper wished that she would say, "Doctor." Frankie wanted, "super," and Brook would have been thrilled if she said, "skull joke." Nami looked at all the men disappointingly. "Grow up, you guys. You don't see Robin all depressed about this." Nami then turned to Robin. The young woman was drinking tea calmly, but she had the same depressing, dark cloud that the guys had, though with a straight face. Nami sighed in disappointment, good grief. With the cake eaten and moods shifted back into cheerful, it was soon time to bid Ace farewell. As the sun began to set, Ace stood next to the railing as he waved to the crew, "Thanks for having me over, guys. It's been a blast." "Ah, do you have to go?" Luffy whined, not wanting his brother to leave just yet. Ace was about to say something when he suddenly felt a tug on his pants. He looked down to see Mika looking up at him, looking tired and a little sad. "Ace," Mika said in a sad and confused tone. Ace smiled and picked up the little baby. "Don't make such a sad face, little monkey. We'll see each other again. Maybe even by your next birthday." Mika sniffed, but still didn't look too happy. Ace was getting a little nervous and looked over to Luffy and Nami for help. Seeing his look, Nami quickly walked up and took Mika. "Don't worry, baby girl. You'll see Uncle Ace again. Now, say, bye-bye." "Bye-bye Ace," repeated Mika while also waving her hand. The crew and Ace were astounded how quickly Mika learned a new word. "Come again soon," Luffy shouted with a grin. The rest of the crew also gave out encouraging words for Ace's next visitation. Ace grinned, "You can count on it." Ace was then about to jump off into his boat, but then he remembered something. "Oh wait. What?" Luffy asked, confused. "I almost forgot to tell you, our dear old Gramps is looking for you. He's in the area too. Bye." Ace then jumped off the ship and onto the striker. Using his fire powers as an engine, he sped off into the horizon. On the Thousand Sunny, most of the crew was frozen in shock. Many of them had their jaws dropped while Robin wore a stunned expression. Mika was just confused about why Ace was leaving and why everyone was so quiet. "What?" Ace laughed out loud as he sailed away. Eventually getting over the shock, the crew soon went to clean the ship up. The only ones left were Nami with Mika and Luffy. Mika was still staring out, trying to reach out for her uncle. Luffy had his mouth open, still in shock. Nami looked down on her little girl and smiled in fondness. "Looks like you'll be meeting more family, right, little princess?" Mika looked at her mother and cooed curiously. Nami's smile got a little brighter and then looked at her fiancé. "What do you think, Luffy?" Luffy was on the ground rocking back and forth in the fetal position. For once, and rarely, Luffy was scared shitless. Gramps is gonna kill me. Nami sighed at her fiancé's suddenly cowardly position. She then heard a soft whine. She looked to see that Mika was almost ready to cry. Nami then placed her over her shoulder and spoke softly, "Oh, poor baby." "Thanks, Nami," Luffy said with a smile. Nami looked at Luffy unamused. "Not you, our baby." "Oh, Nami," Luffy whined in hurt. Nami sighed, realizing who she was talking to. As she checked Mika, the little girl didn't seem too happy, but she gave out a yawn. Nami smiled. "Looks like today really tired her out. I'll put her to bed." "Hey Nami," shouted Usopp as he helped clean. "Me and Frankie put another crib in the crow's nest so someone can watch over Mika so you can sleep in peace." "Thanks Usopp." Nami waved to Usopp happily. A thought then crossed Nami's mind. She turned to Luffy. "What is it, Nami?" asked Luffy. Nami blushed as she spoke bashfully. "Well, I was thinking. Since we're going to be married, eventually, maybe we could sleep together." Luffy thought about it. "Like with the other guys? I don't know, the other guys might." "No," shouted Nami, her blush getting redder from embarrassment. Luffy tilted his head confused. Nami then tried to speak a little more thoroughly. "I mean, in my room." "With Robin?" said Luffy, still confused. Nami groaned in frustration. "No, Robin wouldn't mind sleeping outside the room." And Nami shuffled around in her spot. The rocking caused Mika to yawn. Nami then said, "Maybe if you want it can be permanent." "Oh, that would be cool," Luffy said with a smile. Nami then blew a breath in relief. Though Luffy was happy, having moved up in their relationship, he suddenly thought of something that made him blush. Nami immediately noticed this. "Luffy?" Luffy scratched his head, feeling a bit nervous. Will this be like that one night?" Nami didn't understand what Luffy was mentioning. Seeing her confusion, Luffy then pointed to Mika. Nami then realized what Luffy meant and she looked at him surprised. She soon noticed Luffy's uneasiness, and she knew why. "No, it'll be just simple. You know, like cuddling and just being near each other. Nothing like that night," she said, blushing at the end. Luffy smiled. "Oh, okay then. That sounds fun." Nami giggled and then left, carrying Mika, now falling asleep, to her new crib in the crow's nest. Nami walked up the stairs to the crow's nest where she saw Robin already into one of her books. Hearing Nami enter, Robin looked up from her book and smiled. "Mika is already tuckered out." Nami nodded. Yes, she certainly had a big day. Nami then walked over to the crib and placed Mika in it. She covered the little baby up and then gave her a soft kiss on the forehead. "You know, you didn't actually ask me if you wanted you and Captain to move in together." Nami stiffened as she looked back at Robin, hearing her words. She looked worriedly at the older woman, wondering what she was about to say next. Robin only continued to wear a smile. "You not worry. I've been expecting this for a while, and I will be glad give you and Captain a room together." "Really?" said Nami in surprise. Robin nodded. "Yes, I can sleep in the library until Frankie can do something about a more permanent sleeping area for me." Nami smiled and walked to Robin, giving her a hug. "Thank you." Nami then rushed off. Robin watched her leave smiling and then walked over to Mika. As she watched Mika sleeping, she made a comment. "I wonder, are you going to have a sibling after this? He's big, he's bad, he's grandpa." Mika meets Garp after Ace's warning. The Straw Hats were on high alert for the old Vice Admiral. Luffy was especially on the lookout. If he wasn't eating, sleeping, playing, or hanging with Nami, he was running around the ship keeping an eye out for his grandfather's ship. This didn't sit well with Nami. Though she was now happy that she and her husband-to-be were now sharing a bed, he was far too nervous about running into his grandfather to do anything extra. She couldn't blame him though. They only meet the old Marine once and he was quite scary if you forget that he is Luffy's grandfather. Since last time, the crew had immediately set sail in hopes, by Luffy, that they could dodge his grandfather and make a clean getaway. And it would seem that they did. "They're firing!" shouted Usopp in a panic. Or it was, no sooner did they leave the island a lone Marine ship was on them. And of course, at the head of this attack was Garp-sensei. "You're supposed to be on vacation. Why are you firing on Luffy?" shouted Kobe. "That brat's been way too quiet this last year," shouted Garp as he stood near crates of cannonballs. As he chucked another cannonball, he shouted in anger. Whatever that grandson of mine has been doing, it definitely warrants for a family intervention. I feel sorry for Luffy, Kobe said to himself with a cracked smile. Back on the Sunny, Luffy was both panicking and defending the Sunny. Frankie, burst us out of here. I told ya, Straw Hat, we ran out of cola, Frankie said from the helm. Face it, Luffy, shouted Sanji. He then kicked away a cannonball, sending it into the ocean. You're gonna have to come clean for you, Grandpa. But he's scary, Luffy whined as he hid behind the ship's railing. Grow a backbone, shouted Zoro as he sliced a cannonball. Yo ho ho ho, to think, a fearsome vice admiral of the Marines is Luffy's grandfather. No wonder Mr. Luffy is so scared, Brook commented offhandedly. That's not even the half of it, Usopp said, referring to Luffy's father, Dragon. But he had no time to explain as another cannonball barreled towards them. Ah, another one. Guard point. Having eaten a rumble ball earlier, Chopper got in front of Usopp and Brook. He then transformed into a large puffball. The cannonballs then bounced off Chopper's defense. Let's use the paddles, shouted Luffy. No cola, shouted Frankie, getting frustrated. Luffy. Everyone froze when they heard Garp shout their captain's name. They all looked over towards the side to see the marine ship pulling next to Thousand Sunny. They all looked up to see Garp on the railing and then jump off. The old marine then shot towards Luffy and pummeled him without a second thought. Ow! Shouted Luffy as he rubbed his head. You brat! Shouted Garp, not caring about Luffy's pain. In fact, he gave him another bop to the head. He then began to violently shake Luffy by his collar. I've been worried sick about you. You've been far too quiet over the last year. What have you been up to? Wah 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 wah. Luffy couldn't answer as his grandfather's violent shaking made him far too dizzy to answer. Garp sensei. Garp stopped his violent shaking and looked back towards his ship to see Kobe and Helmeppo join him on board. What's happening? Nami exited the cabin along with Robin, wondering what was going outside. She soon gasped when she saw the marine ship and then the violent Garp. Explain. Yourself. Now, shouted Garp as he continued to scold his grandson. Luffy looked away from his grandfather, unable to come up with anything to say and too nervous to actually lie. Ace. Everyone heard the sweet, overly excited voice. Garp dropped Luffy and looked over to where Nami and Robin stood. Right between the two women was the one-year-old Mika, curious about what was going on outside. Ace. Mika said, confused as she looked between the railing poles. What the, said Helmeppo as he raised his glasses. Kobe was just as stunned. Mika, don't wander off. Nami quickly went to pick Mika up. They both looked down at the others, specifically Garp. Hey brat. Not keeping his eye off the little baby, Garp spoke to his grandson. Luffy lifted himself up, hearing his grandpa. He noticed how unusually serious he was being. Garp then spoke, who's that baby, and why is she here? Well, Luffy fumbled a bit before answering. She's my daughter. Garp's eyes widened in shock, and then everything went black. You think he'll be okay? I checked him over, he'll be alright. I've never seen Garp sensei faint before. Quick, put him on your boat and sail away. Luffy. We can't do that. Ace, ow, my head. Garp finally came to and sat back up. The old man rubbed his head, feeling a slight pain. Man, I had the strangest dream. That my idiot grandson had a daughter. Ridiculous, right? Actually, sir, said Kobe, rather nervous. Bah? Garp looked down to see the same little girl from earlier looking straight up at him. Her dark brown eyes looking straight up at him with intense curiosity. Oh, said Garp, sounding a little surprised. The crew and the two Marines waited for Garp to respond, in any way. They surprised when Garp started laughing. Wahahaha, I can't believe I fainted again. Again? Repeated Kobe, shocked. Yeah, I fainted when I found out my son was born, and I did it again when I found out about Luffy. That's funny, Luffy kinda had a fainting spell of his own after Mika was born, Usopp said, recalling back a year ago. More like a daze. Sanji said coolly. So, this is my great-granddaughter. Garp then picked up Mika. He and the little baby stared at each other. Eventually, Mika became interested in Garp's facial hair and grabbed it. In response, Garp grinned. Yep, definitely your kid, Luffy. defiant as you are. Am not. Luffy said before sticking his tongue out at his grandfather, ironically defiant. Nami face palmed, knowing that Luffy didn't understand the meaning of the word. Garp then looked at the crew. So, who's the lucky lady to marry my grandson? No one spoke up at first. Well, eventually, Nami stepped forward. Garp raised his brow. Technically, we're not married yet. What? Shouted Garp, suddenly enraged. Next thing Luffy knew, his skull was impacted by Garp's fist of love. You brat! I can't believe you knocked up this pretty girl and had a child out of wedlock. Hey, it's not like she didn't like it. The moment Luffy uttered those words, Nami began blushing in embarrassment and very anger. Garp, Kobe, and Helmeppo were utterly speechless. The crew was trying to hold back their laughter. You idiot! Much like Garp, Nami punched her fist down on Luffy's skull. With taking so many hits, Luffy fell over. Luffy looked over to his bride-to-be with a frown. What, you didn't like having Mika and being engorged to me? It's engaged. Nami said, corrected Luffy, and no, I did, but how you said it, it was just embarrassing. Oh, sorry. Nami sighed and then smiled. Don't worry about it. Bawahahahaha. Garp's boisterous laughter brought everyone's attention on him. Setting Mika in his lap, Garp grabbed Nami and brought her into a single-arm hug. I like you, girl. I've never seen anyone wrangle in Luffy's behavior. Welcome to the family. Thanks. Nami said, surprised. So my granddaughter. Mika. Luffy said, sitting back up. Mika, so how old is she? Asked Garp as used his finger to play with Mika. She turned 1 just a few days ago, Robin said offhandedly. What, already a year old? Garp said in mild surprise. Mika then laughed as her great-grandfather began tickling her. Have you already celebrated? Yeah, with Ace. Before Luffy could finish, Garp's fist came crashing down on his skull. You invited that brat, but not your grandfather, scolded Garp, feeling practically insulted. Mika clapped joyfully, being entertained. I can't believe Luffy had a child. I would never have thought, Kobe said in amazement, but also a little happy for his friend. We didn't either, R.O. said with a grin and no regret. I want to celebrate this girl's birthday. Let's have a party. Suddenly Garp spoke loudly to everyone on the Sunny. Everyone was caught off guard by the old man's request. Should we? Asked Frankie, not sure on what to do. I mean, he is a Marine. Yeah, but he doesn't seem like her trying to get us to drop our guard. Usopp said as he eyed the old Marine suspiciously. Why not? The crew looked over to, surprisingly, Nami as she smiled. Luffy was also caught by surprise by his love's sudden interest in a party. She then looked over to Luffy. I did say I wanted Mika to know her family, and Garp is family. Yeah. Let's have a party. Agreeing with Nami, Luffy stood up with renewed vigor. Even Mika clapped and became excited. I guess we have no choice then, I'll start cooking, Sanji said with a smile as he walked to the kitchen. If Mr. Luffy and Mrs. Nami say so, then I shall play with joy in celebration of little Mika's birth once again. Yo-ho-ho-ho, Brook said as he brought out his violin. Garp gasped. Ah, is that a talking skeleton? Now you notice, shouted Kobe and Helmeppo. The Sunny and Garp's ship anchored in the middle of the ocean. The Marines on Garp's ship were given a break, which they found confusing. Of course, Bogrot, unofficial name of Garp's right-hand man in the anime, had ordered them on break, and if they were to try and cross onto the Straw Hats' ship he would personally punish them. The threat was taken quite serious. Meanwhile Garp, Kobe, and Helmeppo were partying with the Straw Hats. Many were quite nervous having a high-ranking Marine on board, but when seeing him play with his great-granddaughter their nervousness was at ease. Despite his earlier worries, Luffy was enjoying his time with his grandpa. Though punches were thrown frequently, Garp had indeed taken a shine on Nami, enjoying her company and enjoying her own punishment for both Luffy and the crew. Of course, he simply adored Mika. The little girl was practically an angel to him. Mika enjoyed playing with her boisterous great-grandfather. The party went well into the night, and eventually it was time to put Mika to bed. Ah, I wanted to play with my granddaughter some more. Garp whined in a similar fashion that Luffy usual done. Good night, Mika, Luffy said as he kissed his daughter on the head. Mika yawned. Nigh, Nami smiled and then went into her and Luffy's room to put Mika in her crib. Garp seemed to take note of this. However, he then turned towards Luffy, who's smiling. Garp was quite impressed. "You've grown quite a bit, Brad." Luffy turned to his grandfather, having only barely heard him. "Though I'm a bit concerned," Garp said, crossing his arms and getting serious. "About what?" Luffy asked, unsure what his grandfather was talking about. "Is it okay to raise a baby or a child on a pirate ship?" said Garp with a straight face. "A pirate ship is no place to raise a kid. She will be in danger from both pirates and marines. I could." "No," Garp was interrupted by Luffy sounding serious. Garp raised his brow at his grandson. "We can take care of Mika, we have been for a year. We are not separating." "Don't be reckless, boy. Think about it, I can take her to Windmill Village. I'm sure Dayton won't mind." "Mika stays with us," Luffy said as he stood abruptly, teetering near anger. The party momentarily stopped when they heard Luffy. Luffy glared at Garp and vice versa. Neither one faltering. Luffy broke eye contact and looked over to see Nami, who looked to be confused. Luffy's expression softened, but he looked back at Garp, still serious. "Fine," conceded Garp. "You've made your decision, can't change that." Luffy didn't say anything and walked away. Garp did the same, though, heading towards his ship. "Kobe, Helmeppo, let's head back to the ship." Yes, sir," the two young Marines said. They both then joined Garp's side as they headed back to the Marine ship. "Looks like the party's over," Zoro said as he was next to leave. No one questioned either the captain or the first mate's decision. "Luffy," said Nami as Luffy walked right past her and into their room. She soon followed after shutting the door behind her. Not much had changed in the room since Robin's room transition. Only thing missing was the two small beds and replaced with one large bed and a crib. Nami found Luffy standing over Mika's crib, looking down on her sleeping. The young navigator was quite worried about her love's sudden mood change. She walked over to him and hugged him from behind. She then asked, "What's wrong, Luffy?" "Nothing," Luffy replied, sounding depressed. "That's a lie if I've ever heard one," Nami said right off the bat. "You know, being husband and wife means you share as much as you can between each other. A life, money, chores, and even problems, ya know?" Luffy was quiet. The two remained silent for quite some time, both watching their little girl sleep. Eventually, Luffy spoke. "I'm just confused." "Confused? About what?" "About what Gramps said." "What did he say?" "That we should give him Mika to send somewhere safe." Nami's eyes widened in surprise. "And you answered." "I said no," Luffy said almost glumly. "So what's wrong?" asked Nami, confused. "Is it okay to keep Mika with us?" Nami was surprised by what Luffy said. She had never heard Luffy actually question his own decision. He had always been confident in any decision he made, especially concerning their daughter. Now that she thought about it, was it okay to keep their daughter with them, a dangerous band of pirates being chased by Marines? They had been careful and they had narrowly come close to being discovered. Maybe they had just been lucky? This was starting to get confusing. "Well," Nami spoke softly. "What do you think? I don't want to leave her," Luffy said instantly. "But I don't want her to get hurt." "I feel the same." Luffy turned his head to Nami, a little surprised. Nami simply smiled back at her fiancé. "But we've come far, faced impossible odds and defeated all kinds of enemies." "Yeah, and raising a child has definitely been more challenging," Nami said almost wearily. Luffy chuckled, understanding easily. Nami then continued. "But we have faith in our nakama, right?" "Right." Luffy nodded happily. "We don't have to worry when we have great nakama." Nami smiled. "Now that sounds like the captain I love." She then gave the man a kiss on the cheek, making Luffy smile. "How about tomorrow we discuss with the crew and then we'll talk to Garp, okay?" "Yeah, that sounds great," agreed Luffy happily. Nami smiled, seeing that Luffy was out of his funk. They both then went to bed together. "Are you sure you want to do this, sir?" In the dead of night, though not as dark, suggesting it was near sunset, Bogrot spoke as he stood on deck. Nearby, Garp stood near the railing facing the Thousand Sunny. Garp looked solemn with his arms crossed. He stared at the door in which he saw his family enter. "My grandson may have made a decision. But I've made mine. Garp's decision that changes everything." The sun rises over the stretch of ocean known as the Grand Line. Its bright rays shine towards through the windows of the Thousand Sunny. In the crow's nest, the sun's bright lights wake a sleeping Usopp. The sniper opened his eyes slowly. When he opened them fully, he noticed something about his position. Why am I on the floor? Usopp sat up and looked around the room. When did I fall asleep and, ow, my head? Usopp rubbed his head, feeling like he was hit by an impact dial. Do I have a hangover? I don't recall drinking last night. Usopp said to himself as he sat contemplating what had happened last night. As he thought to himself, he looked out the window. He noticed something was off. He walked over to the window and opened it. Where's the marine ship? Usopp asked as he couldn't see Garp's ship anywhere. Meanwhile, in Luffy and Nami's room, the young couple was sleeping rather soundly, but not for long. Nami began to stir and she opened her eyes. Luffy was right next to her, lying on his back and snoring, with a snot bubble inflating and deflating with each breath. Nami smiled and carefully lifted herself up. She swiftly replaced her pajamas with today's clothes. She was then about to leave the room, doing so quietly as to not disturb Mika or Luffy. Only Nami stopped just halfway across the room and looked at Mika's crib. Mika is awfully quiet, Nami said quietly to herself. She then approached the crib and checked on the sleeping bundle in it. The little child was covered from head to toe under her blanket. Better uncover her. Nami then went to uncover Mika. Macaw! Nami's scream shook the whole ship. Every single crew member woke up startled. All the men fell out of their hammocks. Robin sat up in her bed in the library, crossing her arms ready to attack. Luffy instantly shot up in bed. He looked across the room to see Nami gripping Mika's crib. He immediately bounced out of bed, literally, and rushed over to Nami. Nami, what's wrong? Shouted Luffy as he reached Nami's side. Nami turned to Luffy. Luffy gasped, seeing Nami in tears. It reminded him of a scene long ago. Nami shouted out in desperation, "She's gone. Mika's gone." What? Luffy looked into the crib. There was no baby, but there was many blankets that made it seem like there was a baby. He was utterly speechless. Where is she? Where is she? Nami was going completely mental as she began to tear apart the room looking for her baby. Where is she? The door swung open and the crew rushed in, all still in their pajamas. What's going on? Shouted Usopp as he held his kabuto out ready to attack. Neither Nami nor Luffy noticed their entrance. Nami was still tearing apart the room looking for Mika, and Luffy seemed to be focusing on something in the crib. Robin pushed past the crew and rushed over to the panicking young mother. She grabbed her and asked, "What's wrong, Nami?" "Mika? Where's Mika?" Nami almost didn't seem to be speaking coherently. She was far too absorbed in looking for her daughter. She even tried fighting Robin's hold. "What? Mika's gone," shouted the crew in shock. "Nami, calm down," shouted Robin as she shook the hysterical woman. The shaking seemed to have worked as Nami returned back to reality. Only it didn't have the calming effect Robin had wanted. Nami started crying into the Robin's shoulder, and the woman comforted her. All of the crew felt for Nami. After all, they all had lost someone important. "Damn it! How did this happen?" shouted Sanji in frustration. Before anyone could say anything, a loud crack silenced them. Everyone turned to see that Luffy, in a fit of rage, punched the wall. Everyone gasped in shock. "Straw Hat! What was that for?" shouted Frankie in anger of his ship damaged. "That bastard!" Luffy completely ignored Frankie, shocking the crew. Luffy then stomped his way outside. "Luffy!" shouted Chopper in surprise. He and the others quickly followed him outside. The only ones left in the room were Robin and Nami. They caught sight of the rubber man as he stretched his way to the deck above. "Mr. Luffy!" Brook shouted, though too late. The group then immediately followed. "Nami, please try to—" Robin was cut off when suddenly the ship shifted suddenly. The two fell to the floor. As they climbed the stairs, when the Sunny suddenly jeered, it threw out the group's balance. Luckily, they had the railing to catch themselves. "What the hell is he doing?" shouted Zoro. "Are you okay?" asked Robin to Nami. Both were currently in the hands of Robin's Hana powers. Nami looked fine, but emotionally she was still broken. Nami continued to cry and Robin wasn't quite sure what to do. Then a piece of paper fell past Robin, catching her interest. She took hold of the paper and gave it a look over. She then gasped, "Oh my." The crew reached the top to see Luffy at the helm. "Luffy, what are you doing?" shouted Usopp, almost frightened by Luffy's sudden attitude change. Luffy didn't reply. He continued to keep his hands on the steering wheel with a fierce scowl. Usopp and Sanji then rushed over to their captain and tried to remove him. Luffy didn't even move an inch. "What's gotten into you, Luffy?" shouted Sanji. "I am taking Mika." All the men except Luffy turned back towards the stairs. Both Robin and Nami had now joined the group. Robin was reading a piece of paper. Nami was no longer crying. In fact, she looked angry. The rest of the crew looked at Robin confused. Usopp spoke up. "Robin, what are you talking about?" "I won't sit back while my great-granddaughter is out on dangerous waters with pirates. So I'm taking her and will be training her for a while." Robin continued to read the letter. The crew listened though were shocked. Luffy clenched the steering wheel as he heard each word. "Don't worry, if I can't make her want to be a Marine then I'll return her. See you in 10 days. Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp." Robin finished the letter. The crew had their jaws dropped. All at once, they shouted in fury, "That bastard! 10 days? What kind of outrageous training is he giving her?" shouted Usopp in anger. "How dare he take our sweet Mika?" Sanji shouted in rage. "That jerk!" Chopper shouted as he transformed into his heavy point form, expressing his anger. "Let's go retrieve little Mika back from that scourge," Brook said in agreement, sounding just as angry. "Move over, Straw Hat, I'll sail Sunny," Frankie said as he tried to take over steering. Luffy didn't move once again. "Oi, Straw Hat," shouted Frankie. "Where do we need to go?" said Zoro with a scowl as he walked up next to his captain. Luffy then held up his hand. And it was an eternal log pose. The crew gasped. "Where did you get that, Luffy?" asked Robin, concerned. "Doesn't matter. We follow the needle," Luffy said, more serious than he had been ever. "Wait, should we be letting Luffy sail? I mean, this is important, he could get us lost," Usopp said, recalling Luffy's habit of getting lost. "No," the crew looked over to Nami, who had spoken very seriously. Nami then began walking forward, her fists clenched, and she spoke to the crew. "Luffy knows what he is doing. I trust him. But Nami, this time is different, Mr. Long Nose." Usopp turned to Robin, hearing his familiar nickname. Robin looked just as serious as Nami. "I believe the captain knows what he is doing." "I agree," Zoro said as he stood crossed-armed. After that, no one bothered Luffy. Everyone soon left him alone, putting their trust that Luffy knew he was doing. While the others went off, probably to vent out their anger and prepare for a fight, Luffy kept at the steering. Only he had Nami and Robin with him. Nami stood faithfully by her fiancé's side, just as determined and angry as he is. Robin, however, was there for much different reason. She held up the eternal log pose and studied it carefully. There was a label on it. "Temper?" Robin said, confused. "I've never heard of this island?" And thus the crew sailed towards Temper. Due to the lack of cola and thus no way of using the coup de nny 4 days before they finally caught sight of the island. And with it, they saw Garp's ship stationed at the marine base. The crew stood at the front of the ship. Each one was ready to fight. "Do we have a plan?" asked Usopp, breaking the moment. "Bust in and kick every marine's ass," Zoro said with a sadistic smile. Usopp panicked. Wait, maybe we should think about this for a sec." "Gramps." Luffy didn't have time to listen. The moment they were within stretching distance, Luffy shot his arm out. He then grabbed onto a wall, poised to launch himself. "Wait, Luffy!" shouted Nami as she grabbed Luffy. The rubber man was surprised by Nami's sudden action, but he couldn't stop. Both he and Nami were sent hurtling towards the base. "Luffy!" shouted Sanji in rage. "If you hurt Nami," Sanji was then silenced by Zoro bonking Sanji on the head. Meanwhile, Luffy and Nami had surprisingly made it safely above the wall of the base. "Would you be quiet? This is a family affair," Zoro said sternly. "We're family too," shouted Sanji as he jumped off the Sunny and landed on the dock, where he was met with several Marines. "Pirate attack!" shouted one of the Marines. Sanji jumped onto one of the Marines and landed on his head in handstand. Party table kick course. He then spun around rapidly as he delivered savage kicks anyone within range. He then dismounted the Marine he was on and kicked him. When the Sunny finally docked, the crew jumped off the ship. Zoro shouted, "Oi, wait for the rest of us. Defend the base." Another Marine shouted from the other side of the docks. Soon more Marines began rushing out the base. The Straw Hats prepared to fight back. "Are you okay, Nami?" Already ahead of the others, Luffy checked Nami for any injuries. Thankfully, Luffy had taken much of the impact of the landing. Nami was on top of him, barely injured. "I'm fine, Luffy," Nami said as she lifted herself off her captain. As she stood up, she heard the sound of battle and turned to see the rest of the crew making their way up the base. "Nami," seeing the navigator, Zoro shouted towards her, "You and Luffy go find Mika." "What about you guys?" Nami shouted back. "We can handle them, girly," Frankie said confidently as he shot out his right hand at a group of Marines. Brook instantly sliced several Marines before adding in his own comment. "Besides, isn't it natural for parents to find their lost child? Of course, I can't find anything since I have no eyes to see with." "Yo ho ho ho, skull joke," laughed Brook despite the serious nature of the situation. "We can wait until after you've rescued Mika," Robin said with a smile. Meanwhile around her, all many Marines were caught in her Hana powers. "And bring her back smiling," Sanji said coolly as he kicked a Marine of the docks. Nami smiled. She then rushed over to Luffy and helped him up. She then kept hold of his hand. "They're right, it's our responsibility to find Mika." Luffy smiled and nodded. "Let's go." Hand in hand, the two ran off into the Marine base. "Go find Mika, Chopper, in Horn Point," said cheering on Luffy and Nami before attacking a group of Marines. "Go guys," shouted Usopp with vigor as he took down Marine after Marine with his special ammunition and Kabuto's slingshot. Luffy and Nami ran through the base looking Garp or Mika or anyone that could really help them. As they rounded a corner, the couple found a group of Marines in waiting for them. "Nami." Luffy pushed his fiancée back down the hall. "Fire," shouted the commanding Marine. Every Marine fired and hit Luffy, but since he was a rubber man the bullets had no effect on him. "Take your bullets back," Luffy shouted as he sent the bullets right back at the group, hitting almost all of them. "Thanks, Luffy." Nami soon returned back to Luffy's side, though this time she was brandishing her perfect clean attack. Luffy replied back with a grin. He was distracted as he did not see one of the Marines brand a sword. "I got ya, Straw Hat," shouted the Marine. "Swing arm." Nami rushed around Luffy, swung her perfect clean attack, and hit the Marine with electricity. The poor Marine was fried on contact. "Whoa, thanks Nami," Luffy said with a grin. "Well, being married means being a team, right?" Nami said with a smile. "Yeah," Luffy cheered excitingly. The two pirates then rushed off to find Garp and Mika. Hawk waved. Outside, the crew had finally made their way to the base's front door. Zoro had easily dealt with a group of Marines. He then sheathed both his swords. "This seems far too easy," Zoro said as he had a look around. "Yes, it does look that way," Robin said as she easily walked past the many unconscious bodies. "That must mean it's a super victory for us," Frankie shouted victoriously as he finished off another group with his weapons left. "Yeah," cheered Usopp and Chopper along with Frankie. With another slice, Brook finished his opponent swiftly. He then took notice of Robin moving ahead. "Ah, Ms. Robin, where are you heading off to?" She looked back at the living skeleton. "I'm curious about this island. I've never heard of Temper until today. And I'm curious about why the Vice Admiral took Mika here." "It's just the closest Marine base, right?" asked Zoro, not getting the full picture. There's more to it than that. I'm going to find out." Robin then turned and entered the Marine. "Ah, Robin, you are smart as you are beautiful," Sanji shouted out in his love-struck mode. As Robin continued to walk, she soon heard footsteps not her own. She didn't even need to turn to recognize who it was. "Curious yourself, Zoro?" "Not too much, but maybe there are still a few surprises inside. Wouldn't hurt to tag along," Zoro said rather apathetically. Robin smiled. "Suit yourself." She then continued onwards with Zoro tagging along. Could this be a new development? "Hey, wait for us," shouted Usopp as he and the others ran after the two. The doors busted down as by one powerful quick from Luffy. Once out of the way, he and Nami entered the rather nice-looking office. They were shocked when they found Kobe standing in front of the desk and fearlessly standing before. Now in seeing him, Nami was already angry at the young officer. On the other hand, Luffy was merely surprised. "Kobe, what are you doing here?" asked Luffy. "I'm here to lead you to where Garp-sensei and Mika are," Kobe said seriously. This surprised Nami. "Why, isn't Garp your commanding officer?" Nami said suspiciously. Kobe sighed in guilt. "I didn't agree with him taking Mika. I tried to stop him, but you know how he gets when he gets an idea," Kobe said with a nervous smile. "You gave us the eternal pose, didn't you?" asked Nami as she put two and two together. "Yes, ma'am." Kobe nodded. "Kobe," Luffy spoke, gaining Kobe's attention. He was quite surprised that Luffy wasn't practically ready to punch him. Instead, Luffy looked quite even-faced despite the obvious frown. Luffy then continued to speak. "Please take us to where Mika is." Kobe nodded, but looked rather sad. "I will, but you may not like what you find, Luffy, Nami. Take us to Mika." Both Luffy and Nami said the same sentence, showing their determination as parents. "Follow me." Kobe then led the two out of the office. Coincidentally, the name plate on the desk read, Garp. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the base, Zoro and the others were taking down a few more Marines that had managed to pop out. Nearby, Robin was looking through the record books. What she read was quite intriguing. Every week, there is new staff with the exception of a few higher-ups. Not only that, but it seems that Marine ships dock here just as regularly. Robin thus shifted through a few personal files. Zoro only had a few opponents left as he remained guard near Robin. He sheathed his sword, not even bothering to see these Marines as a challenge. One Marine, feeling insulted, went to swing his sword down on Zoro. At this point, Zoro thought it would be cool to bring out an old technique. Sword. Zoro brought his arms up to catch the blade. Catch. Shinli Sanji came out of nowhere and kicked Zoro's head, causing his head to block the sword at the hilt rather than his hands with the blade. The Marine was very confused by the sight. What the hell was that for? Zoro recovered and turned to Sanji, yelling at the chef. "Nami may have found her true love, but I'll be damned if you make a move on Robin," Sanji shouted, sounding pissed. "Shut up, stupid love cook," retorted Zoro. A storm was brewing between the two men, one that was not obviously seen by the Marine from earlier. The Marine went to strike the two pirates. Even while arguing, both Zoro and Sanji punched and kicked Marine, though accidentally sending him towards Robin. The Marine landed just on the desk. Sanji gulped, feeling like he was disturbing something. Zoro just looked annoyed. "Robin dear, I'm sorry that we disturbed you." Despite Sanji's apology, Robin was not bothered. When the Marine tried to stand up, but find himself grabbed by Robin's hands and then knocked out. "Interesting," Robin said while not even batting an eye at the Marine she just took out. Sanji was kind of stunned. "What is it?" asked Zoro as he walked over to Robin. This man, one of Robin's hands appeared and pointed at the now knocked out Marine. Both Zoro and Sanji looked at the Marine and then Robin, confused by what she was meaning. Luffy and Nami followed Kobe through the base. They were currently heading downstairs far beneath the base. Once they reached the bottom of the stair, they found themselves in a very large room. "Whoa," said Luffy, amazed, causing an echo. "This room is huge," Nami commented, just as amazed as her captain. "Hurry, follow me." Kobe then went into a sprint. Luffy and Nami were surprised, but soon followed. The group ran across the room until they reached a very large steel doors. Both steel doors had a large fore that seemed to be part of number wheel. In front of the doors was Helmeppo with his back turned away from the group. When he heard the sounds of footsteps, he turned around to see Kobe and the couple. He was immediately shocked. "See, Kobe? What are you doing? Why are they here?" "Sorry, Helmeppo, but I can't let Garp-sensei keep Mika another day longer." Nami gasped. "Mika's in there," Nami said, pointing to the big doors. "Yes, and we need to open them before any more time passes," Kobe said urgently. "Hey, why's there a big fore on the door?" Everyone looked over to Luffy as he looked up at the door. Nami looked at the doors. It was weird that the doors had a big fore on them. Even more so that it looked like the number was slowly changing. "It looks like a timer," Nami said observantly. "Because it is." Luffy and Nami turned to Kobe. The young Marine was looking down at the floor, clenching his teeth and fist like he was guilty. A timer? For what? Luffy asked, confused. It's for this room, the room of training, Kobe said, gesturing to the doors. In it, time and space are distorted. It's part of a new training program. We can literally train Marines in one day. What? How? Shouted Nami, unable to understand what Kobe was saying. Kobe looked hesitant to reply. It's because of a devil fruit. And thanks to it, 1 day out here is equal to 1 year in there, Kobe said, lowering his head. Nami's expression changed to shock. Luffy looked to be a little confused. I don't get it, so it's a mystery room? Luffy, Nami, Luffy looked over to Kobe. The poor man didn't want to speak again, but he knew this had to be said. Mika has been in that room for 4 days. In that room, it's been 4 years since she saw you. Nami's legs finally collapsed and she fell to the floor. To describe how she felt would be impossible. The realization of what had happened to her daughter had taken its toll. She couldn't even cry or react in anger. Luffy was speechless and stunned. He stared at Kobe, who had his head down in shame, and then turned his head towards the doors. He stared at the big red fore like it was his worst enemy.